In this video, we are going to build a mobile network inspector. We are using native modules and React Native. So we will use Expo Modules to write native code for Android and iOS and expose everything to JavaScript. So the first thing that we are going to do is folder. We are going to Android, and then we go to this and go to Java, and then here it's where our native modules lives. So, but we are going to create a folder here, and we are going to call it network. And then within this folder, we are going to create another file, and we're going to call network inspector manager .kotlin, right? This file contains the main Android logic for the network inspector. It uses OK HTTP to make requests, capture useful request data, redact sensitive header, store everything in memory, and returns it back to React Native. So the first thing that we are going to do is add some imports. The first imports that we need to do is this one where our file lives, basically, right? So it's Expo, Modules, Native Lab, and Network, right? So, and the second imports that we need to do, it's the HTTP OK, which is the HTTP client we are using on Android. I'm also importing the UUID to generate Unix ID for each request. So now we need to define a class, and this class is the main manager for the network inspector. We also pass in an emit event function, so later we can send data back to React Native. And just to notice here, this is not an Expo module itself. It is a helper class that contains real network. Next, we need two internal states. The first one will be a star, which tell me whether the inspector is enabled, and the second will be entries, store all the capture requests in memory. So let's define them over here. So now let's take a look at the headers to redact. So it's this piece of code over here. And these are sensitive headers that should never be logged in plain text. So if the request contains something like an auth token or cookie, we will replace it with redact. So now we need to save the entries, and we are doing this over here. So this helper function stores new request entries in memory. We insert the newest entries at the top of the list, so it appears first in the UI. We also limit the request to 200 items, so memory usage stay under control. And we need a way to sanitize the header, right? And we are doing this over here. And this function loops over all request header and builds a safe version of them. If the header is sensitive, we replace the value with redact, right? Otherwise, we keep the original value. And now we need the interceptor. So this is the core of the network inspector. An OK interceptor runs every time a request goes through the client. So this gives me one place to inspect every request automatically. So, and now also we need the metadata, which is this code over here. And before sending the request, we collect some metadata: the request itself, the start time, the URL, the protocol, and the sanitized header. We also create a warnings list, which we will use to flag problems. So like now here we have the insecure warnings, and if the request uses plain HTTP instead of HTTPS, we add an insecure warning. Then we have the successful request, which is all of this. We let the request continue by calling the chain that precedes request, which is here. And we have slow warnings. If the request make more than 2 seconds, we add a slow request warning, right, which is over here. And then we build our entry objects, right, which is all of this. And here we create the final object that represents one network request. It includes the URL, the method, status code, duration, protocol, timestamp, warnings, and sanitized header, request header. And over here we are saving the entry. right? We are calling the function that we define over here. This one, we are saving the request in memory. And right now, we are not emitting live to React Native because I want the UI to load the entries manually, right? This one. And we have the response, and now we have the error path, right? Which is basically this one over here. And if the request failed, we still want to log it, right? Which is this part over here. In failure cases, we set the status code to 0 and store error message instead, right? Which is this one right here, the one that comes from the exception. If not, we simply log unknown error. Still save the request. It is optionally, and we emit it back to React Native and then read through an error, right? Which is over here. This is sent back to the React Native and through an error over here. And then we have the OK client, which is this part over here. And this creates the OK client. The important part is the add interceptor logging interceptor, right? Which is this part over here. And because that means every request made through this client will automatically inspect it, right? And then we have the start, stop, and get entries, right? Which is this part over here. And basically the start function over here is just to enable the inspector, right? And the stop, disable it. And then we have the clear, which remove all the entries, right? And then we have the get entries with this function over here, returns everything currently stored in memory, right? And then last, we have the making request, which is this part over here. And this function performs a real native request. First, we check whether the inspector has been started, right? If not, we set inspector not started. We have to start it first. And we build a request and include some sample headers so we can test header reduction, right? Which is this part over here. And finally, we execute the request using OK HTTP client, which is over here. And since the client already has the interceptor attached, the request is automatically logged, right? So in summary, overall, this manager creates OK HTTP client with an interceptor, capture requests, metadata, redact sensitive header, adds warning like insecure HTTP or a slow request, store everything in memory, and expose methods that React Native can call. So now we have to go to the React Native Lab module, right? And here we are going to define a few functions that will call the network inspector manager, right? So that way React Native can access to that logic that we defined in this file, right? So to make it easier and faster, I'm just going to copy this and I will explain what we are doing here, right? So the first thing over here, we are importing this network inspector manager over here, and then I want to explain what this means. The class Expo native lab module, and then we have module over here. So this class defines the native module by extending a module. Expo knows that this class should be exposed to React Native. Every Expo module must extend this module class. So now in this part, we are creating an instance of the network inspector manager. This class contains the network logic and request interception, right? So, and one thing that's very important is this part over here. So we also pass the send event function to the manager. This allows the manager to send events back to React Native when a network request capture. And this is very important concept, guys. So then we have the this definition, and this method defines the JavaScript API of the native module. Everything inside this block becomes accessible from React Native. Think of this as defining what functions JavaScript can call, right? And this is what we are doing here, right? This is basically the communication between React Native and the native code, right? So, and then we have the module name, which is this one. And this defines the name of the native module. React Native will use this name to load the modules, right? And then we have the on request, which is this over here. This declares an event that native code can emit. In this case, the event is triggered when a network request is intercepted. We have the start function, which is this. This exposes a function called start to JavaScript. This is basically the name of the function, start. And then when React Native calls it, we simply delegate to the network manager, right? So basically when React Native calls this, it will go through this and will go through a network inspector. And then we have a function there that we call start, right? It's this one right here, right? And that basically just enabled the inspector. And then we have the stop function, which will do the same thing. This function disable the network inspector, and it will go through our network inspector manager, right? And it will just basically turn this off or make it to false, right? And then we have the clear, which basically the same thing. I will clear or removes all the logged network requests stored in memory, right? It goes here, it will clear all of them. And then we have the get entries, which is this one right here. And it will log all the entries that are in our memory, saved in our memory, right? Which is this one right here. And then we have the main request. Basically, this exposes an asynchronous function that performs a native network request. You know, network requests can take time. This function returns a promise to JavaScript. So we have to await this when we are using it in the front, in our front end. The important idea here is that this module acts as a bridge. React Native code functions like start, stop, get entries, clear, make request, and this module forward those calls to the network inspector manager, which contain the real network logic. So now that we have all our native code for Kotlin, let's start working on our types. So let's create a folder here, and we are gonna call it network. And actually you can delete this. I'm gonna leave it here, but if you want, you can delete them. So now here we are gonna create a few files. The first one will be index.ts. The second one will be type.ts. And then we have the module, right? Let me create that file there, .ts. And then we are gonna work on the types first. And here we are gonna define the shape of our data, right? Which is our payload that we'll get from our native code, right? Where we have the ID, URL, method, status code, it's all of this, right? This is our shape of our data here, right? And then we have the network on request. Basically here we are gonna pass the URL and to make the request, right? Which is basically this one right here, make a request, right? So, and then we save that file. So now we need to export this so we can import some of this type in our module, right? So let's go to this. Let me copy this, and this is the way we are gonna export this. And basically we have access to this type, and we are gonna use those type over here, right? And this is giving an error because we need to define this one in here, right? Let me copy that code there so I can explain what it's doing. So here, basically, we are importing two things from export, right? The native module, which give us the base type for the native modules, right? And we have the required native module, which is how we load the actual native implementation, right? Importing these two types from our types. And basically, that means that the network events describe how or describe the shape of our log request, right? And this one describe the native events this module can emit, right? And we are using both of them, one here and we are using the other one here, right? And so now what this means is that this declares the shape of the native module in TypeScript, right? This part over here. And this part, this native module, this part, by extending the native module, this class gets native module behavior, and by passing network events, we are saying this module can emit typed events back to React Native, right? And where is this? This comes from this one, right? This one, and this one, and all of this. And of course, this will call our network manager, our network inspector manager, right? This is all of this. And one thing to notice here, the Expo native lab, this name has to match what we have here. That's why it's so important, guys. So if not, this won't be able to find our native module, and then we will get an error, right? So this file acts as the TypeScript contract between the JavaScript and the native module. It defines methods, the arguments, and the return types, and then loads the React Native implementation using required native modules, right? This part over here. So in the next video, we are going to write the native code for iOS, and also we're going to start the navigation, we're going to create the home screen, and we're going to create the network inspector screen. Basically, we are working on the iOS and the front-end code. Thank you for watching, guys. See you in the next one.